For months, his name had been missing from the conversation, not because he wasn't involved or didn't matter, but because he chose not to speak. While headlines shifted focus between Sara Bluma and Yaman, while interviews dissected smiles, appearances, and silences, one figure remained noticeably absent from the narrative: Stefano. The man the public associated with Sara's past, the man whose perspective was quietly ignored as speculation grew louder by the day, and that absence became its own question. People assumed his silence meant indifference, others interpreted it as dignity, some believed he had simply moved on, unwilling to reopen a chapter that no longer belonged to him. But those assumptions were incomplete because Stefano hadn't been silent out of comfort, he had been silent out of restraint. Those close to him described the months following the breakup as controlled but tense, not dramatic or chaotic, just carefully measured. He avoided interviews, declined invitations, refused to comment even when his name was pulled into conversations he never started, and the narrative continued without him, shaped by fragments and interpretations that lacked one crucial element: his voice. And yet the pressure built. Every time Sara's name appeared next to Yaman's, questions resurfaced, not directly asked but implied. How did Stefano feel? What did he know? Was there overlap, betrayal, misunderstanding, or nothing at all? The public didn't wait for answers, it filled the gaps on its own, and that was the moment silence stopped being neutral. According to sources, Stefano watched the narrative drift further from reality with growing discomfort, not because it painted him as a victim, but because it simplified something that had never been simple. Relationships don't end cleanly just because headlines demand clarity, and when other people begin rewriting your story for you, staying quiet becomes a risk. The decision to speak did not come suddenly, it came after hesitation, after private conversations, after realizing that staying silent no longer protected anyone. Stefano understood that once he spoke there would be no undoing it, no reframing, no taking words back, and unlike others in the spotlight, he wasn't accustomed to public confession. He wasn't chasing attention or relevance, he was responding to distortion. When he finally agreed to address the situation, it wasn't framed as an accusation or a revelation, it was framed as clarification, a chance to restore proportion to a story that had grown louder than the truth itself. What made his decision especially striking was one detail insiders quietly confirmed. Stefano did not intend to speak only about Sara, he intended to speak about Yaman as well, not aggressively, not emotionally, but honestly, and that alone was enough to unsettle everyone who had assumed this was a story with only two voices, because when the third voice finally enters the room, the balance changes. The days leading up to Stefano's decision were heavier than anyone outside his circle realized. Requests kept coming, some subtle, some direct. Journalists asked for just a brief comment, friends warned him that silence was starting to look like avoidance, others urged him to stay quiet, reminding him that speaking would drag him deeper into a storm he had managed to stay out of for so long. But Stefano wasn't afraid of the storm, he was tired of distortion. What pushed him closest to the edge was not a headline but a conversation, someone casually mentioning how the public had already decided what happened between Sara Bluma and Yaman as if facts had been confirmed rather than imagined, and Stefano listened, nodded, and said quietly, "That's not how it happened." It was the first time he said it out loud, and from that moment staying silent felt dishonest, not dramatic or painful, just wrong, because allowing a false version of events to harden into public truth meant accepting a narrative he did not recognize. When he finally sat down to speak, there was no theatrical build-up, no grand reveal, the setting was calm, the tone controlled, almost understated, and that was precisely what made it powerful. He began without naming anyone, saying he stayed quiet because he believed some things should remain private, but privacy becomes meaningless when it's replaced by fiction. The room shifted. Stefano didn't raise his voice, didn't accuse, didn't defend himself aggressively. Instead he corrected assumptions one by one, calmly dismantling months of speculation with something far more dangerous than drama: precision. He spoke about Sara Bluma not as an ex framed by resentment but as a person framed by context, acknowledging complexity and challenging the idea that her story could be reduced to a single connection or timeline. Then he mentioned Yaman, with no tension or bitterness, just clarity, making it clear that assumptions about rivalry, overlap, or hidden conflict had been exaggerated beyond recognition, that dots had been connected where none existed, and that allowing those assumptions to circulate unchallenged had caused unnecessary damage to everyone involved. The silence in the room was complete, not awkward but focused, because this wasn't a man defending pride, it was someone reclaiming accuracy. Stefano finished without seeking sympathy or validation, placing his version of events into a conversation that had excluded him for far too long, and in doing so shifted the entire narrative. The reaction didn't arrive instantly. At first there was confusion. People replayed his words expecting aggression or emotional cracks, but found consistency instead. His version didn't contradict itself, didn't escalate, didn't invite sides, and that made it difficult to dismiss. Speculation slowed, media outlets hesitated, restraint replaced exaggeration, and once his silence was gone the structure built on it collapsed. Sara was contextualized, humanized, removed from the role imposed on her, and Yaman's lack of reaction only reinforced alignment rather than conflict. No rebuttal followed, no escalation, no outrage, just adjustment. The narrative recalibrated, revealing that much of the drama had been sustained by silence rather than fact. As days passed, the noise lost its grip, the story stopped feeding on itself, headlines softened, fans let go, and behind the scenes all three lives continued separately. Stefano stepped back without repeating or expanding his words, signaling an ending that didn't need escalation, and the audience accepted that not every story needs a villain or a dramatic conclusion. Finally, when everything settled, it became clear that Stefano didn't change the story by speaking loudly, he changed it by speaking once. His restraint exposed exaggeration, restored accuracy, and ended speculation without spectacle. He disappeared back into privacy not because he was defeated, but because his purpose was complete. What left everyone speechless wasn't what he said about his ex Sara Bluma or how he mentioned Yaman, it was how little he needed to say, because truth doesn't require volume, it requires timing, and when delivered with clarity, it doesn't ignite chaos, it ends it. Even after the noise faded, the past did not disappear. It lingered quietly, not in headlines or trending clips, but in conversations people were no longer having out loud. Stefano's words had corrected the narrative, yet correction does not erase memory, it sharpens it. Those who followed the story closely began revisiting moments they had once ignored, old interviews where answers felt evasive, photos that now seemed carefully timed rather than spontaneous, silences that once felt empty but now appeared deliberate. What emerged was not scandal but coherence. For the first time, events aligned in a way that felt realistic instead of dramatic. Sara Bluma's withdrawal from the spotlight no longer looked like avoidance but like autonomy. Yaman's restraint no longer invited suspicion but suggested boundaries. Stefano's single statement became the hinge that allowed everything else to make sense. Slowly, people began to understand that this story had never been driven by conflict, rivalry, or competition, but by projection, by the public's need to simplify complexity into digestible drama, something complexity never cooperates with. Behind closed doors, insiders admitted that the story had spiraled because silence had been interpreted as permission to assume, to invent motives, to rewrite timelines without accountability, and Stefano's intervention revoked that permission. Once revoked, the past lost its grip on the present, not completely, but enough to stop controlling it. The emotional residue remained, but fans adjusted, slowly and thoughtfully, some even admitting discomfort with how easily they had accepted exaggerated narratives without hearing all sides, and that discomfort mattered because it marked the moment the audience stopped consuming the story and started reflecting on it. As reflection replaced reaction, a deeper truth surfaced: some stories are never meant to be public in full. Relationships end quietly more often than they end explosively. People drift apart without villains, betrayals, or dramatic turning points, yet when public figures are involved, quiet endings are rarely accepted, they are seen as incomplete, suspicious, unfinished. That expectation had haunted all three names involved. Sara was expected to explain herself, Ken was expected to react, Stefano was expected to defend or accuse, even though none of them owed the public that. Stefano's words reframed that pressure, not by satisfying curiosity but by challenging entitlement, reminding people that access to someone's life does not include access to every truth. That reminder landed harder than any revelation. Journalists quietly acknowledged it, some even admitting off record that the story had been pushed further than facts justified, not out of malice but momentum, because once a narrative begins it sustains itself unless interrupted, and this interruption was calm, measured, unavoidable. What made Stefano's intervention so effective was not what he revealed but what he refused to add. He did not expand timelines, offer emotional commentary, or hint at hidden details, and that restraint forced the story to stand on its actual weight instead of imagined gravity. Observers noted how rare that was in an era where oversharing is rewarded and escalation is expected. Stefano did not win attention by feeding the story, he ended it by starving it, and that choice resonated beyond this situation. Commentary shifted from gossip to reflection, from speculation to discussions about how narratives form, how silence is weaponized by others, and how public perception often says more about the audience than the subject. Not everyone noticed, but those who did not forget. Closure did not arrive with an announcement, it arrived quietly. Weeks passed, new stories replaced old ones, names moved on, yet this situation did not linger as unresolved the way similar stories often do. It faded with a sense of completion that surprised even those who followed it closely, not because every question was answered, but because the right one was. The question was never what really happened, but why it needed to be more than it was. Stefano's voice, calm, singular, and precise, answered that without saying it directly. By refusing to dramatize, he closed the door the public kept trying to reopen, and that door stayed closed. In the end, no one emerged as a winner or a loser, no reputations were destroyed, no truths were weaponized, instead something rare occurred in public storytelling, balance, and balance, unlike drama, does not demand attention, it simply exists.